Quit faking it, get in the kitchen. My mom screamed as I fell onto the hardwood floor of the country club VIP lounge. My lungs seized up entirely, unable to pull in a single breath. The razor-sharp stiletto heel of my mother Sarah drove without hesitation directly into the jagged, unhealed scar on my chest, the weeping remnant of a grueling overseas assignment last year. She ground her heel down, her eyes completely dry, glaring with absolute venom. My sister Chloe stood beside her with her arms firmly crossed, her upper lip curling back in raw disgust. "Stop being so lazy. Nobody here is going to wait on you." In the corner of the room, my Uncle Arthur shrank back into the heavy drapes. I could see the cowardly tension in his jaw. He remained completely mute, his fingers tightly gripping an envelope of condolence money, entirely willing to watch his niece suffocate just to protect his next financial handout from my mother. My vision blurred into shadows. Just as my heart rate faded into a hollow thud, the heavy mahogany doors violently swung open. Major Eric Vance, my unit's JAG officer, rushed in. He dropped to his knees on the hardwood, pressed 2 fingers against my carotid artery to check my fading pulse, and roared with a terrifying authority that shook the entire room, "Call 911 right now." A dead silence fell over the people who shared my bloodline, and then sheer terror. Before I tell you what happened next, take a quick moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Don't go anywhere, because the suffocating smell of my mother's perfume violently snapped my memory back to the exact moment this nightmare began. I stood completely frozen at the top of the stairs exactly 3 days before that horrifying collapse at the country club. My heavy boots were still coated in the dry, chalky dirt of Syria, a desolate place halfway across the world where the line between living and dying was razor thin. My entire body ached from the grueling tension of the deployment, but nothing prepared me for the toxic, heavy air suffocating the very house I used to call home. The space felt eerily polished, reeking of expensive synthetic lavender, desperately trying to mask the absolute rot of moral decay underneath. I looked down at a crumpled medical debt notice I had just found kicked under the hallway table. The bold red numbers burned straight into my retinas. My dad's out-of-network heart medication, the single vital fluid keeping his failing valves pumping, had been completely cut off 2 months ago. The tens of thousands of dollars I had precisely routed from my military pay directly to his care had vanished without a single trace. Even my grandfather's death benefits had been entirely drained. Every cent I had earned bleeding under a foreign sun gone. I slowly shifted my gaze toward the corner of the living room. My dad sat slumped deep into his faded armchair. His hands that were once strong, rough, and permanently stained with grease from fixing my rusted bicycle chains on summer afternoons, were now a horrifying shade of purple. His liver-spotted fingers gripped the armrests with a trembling, desperate tension. He took short, shallow breaths, his chest rising with a frail, agonizing rhythm that echoed through the quiet room. I could still hear him humming that old church hymn as he carefully unscrewed the brown iodine bottle to clean my scraped knees, his thick fingers impossibly gentle against my small skin. He completely refused to meet my eyes, now staring blankly at the scratched floorboards. He was slowly fading away, entirely stripped of his autonomy, trapped in his own living room, while his life was drained away dollar by dollar. Before I could take a single step toward him, a shrill, piercing voice echoed up the stairwell on a speakerphone call, instantly shattering the heavy silence. It was my sister Chloe. Her grating laughter echoed off the walls, utterly detached from the suffocating reality of our father's failing heart. I stood perfectly still in the hallway, listening as she confidently laid out her horrific scheme with her corrupt lawyer, Marcus Thorne. "Exactly, Marcus. You just handle the paperwork." Chloe's voice dripped with raw, unfiltered arrogance. "Once you finalize that fake medical evaluation proving that brat Shayla is mentally incompetent, we'll file for emergency conservatorship. Then the old man won't have anyone left to lean on. He'll have to obediently sign away the deed to this entire property. I want that deed finalized before the weekend." My stomach cramped, the acidic taste of pure disgust flooding the back of my throat. She wasn't starving or desperate, she was simply addicted to an elite illusion. She was actively sacrificing our father's oxygen to fund her fake high society facade, perfectly willing to lock her own sister in a psychiatric ward just to secure a piece of paper. Heavy footsteps clicked sharply against the wooden stairs. Chloe strutted into the living room draped in a brand new glossy silk coat. She didn't pause for a single second to look at our father struggling to breathe in the corner. With complete unapologetic entitlement, she carelessly tossed a crumpled piece of paper onto the glass coffee table. It slid to a stop right next to my dad's completely empty dry pill bottles. I recognized the logo instantly, a rental receipt for a brand new convertible Porsche. The monthly cost of that luxury illusion could have easily funded my dad's heart medication for 6 solid months. She jingled her keys, her lip curling in raw disgust as she scanned my uniform from head to toe. She spun around and walked away, without a word, leaving behind a trail of cheap perfume. In the dark hallway behind her, I caught a glimpse of Uncle Arthur standing perfectly still, his eyes darting away the instant they met mine. He had heard everything. He said nothing. He simply faded back into the shadows, clutching his own silence like a shield. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The burning rage instantly froze into a cold, calculating silence. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and typed a single decisive message to Major Eric Vance. These parasites were going to pay with everything they desperately craved. 2 nights later, darkness draped the sprawling house in a suffocating heavy silence. The air was still thick with that same synthetic lavender spray, a desperate attempt by my mother to mask the decaying reality of this rotting household. Tomorrow was my grandfather's memorial service at the country club VIP lounge. I stood closely by my dad's frail, creaking medical bed. His knuckles were bone white as he weakly gripped the thin bedsheets, and the rhythmic, raspy hum of the oxygen concentrator was the only sound tethering him to the living. My mother Sarah marched into the room. She didn't approach the bed with the worry of a loving wife. She strutted in with the cold, arrogant authority of a prison warden inspecting her cells. A brand new pearl necklace gleamed around her throat, purchased with the exact savings meant to keep her husband's failing heart pumping. She casually locked her glossy iPhone screen. Just moments before, in the dark hallway, I had clearly heard her shrill, desperate laughter as she booked a tea time with Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, practically begging for the elite woman's validation, while her own husband gasped for air. She stopped right in front of me, crossing her arms tightly across her chest with towering arrogance. Her eyes narrowed chillingly, scanning my posture from head to toe. She didn't waste a single breath on pleasantries or fake maternal concern. "You have until tomorrow morning to write down the PIN for your military pension fund." She hissed, her voice as sharp as broken glass, completely void of any warmth. If I don't see those numbers on the kitchen counter by breakfast, I'm throwing this old man into the most run-down nursing home in the state. He'll be left to rot on a bed-bug-infested mattress, eating mush mixed with cheap sedatives until his bones turn to dust. The sheer cruelty of her words forced the muscles along my spine to instantly lock up, my body's automatic response to a direct threat. My chest burned fiercely as a deeply buried memory violently clawed its way to the surface of my mind. I was suddenly 10 years old again, standing barefoot in the kitchen, falsely accused of stealing Chloe's makeup money. My mother hadn't listened to a single word of my panicked explanations. She had simply grabbed my father's heavy leather belt and lashed my back until the welts burned completely, crushing the spirit of a sobbing, terrified child. The phantom sting of that leather violently ripped through my mind right now, a harsh reminder that in this household any impulsive resistance was severely punished. But I was no longer a cowering 10-year-old begging for scraps of mercy. I was a seasoned officer who had stared down absolute despair and learned exactly how to survive the harshest conditions. I knew exactly how to play this psychological game. Silence wasn't a display of pathetic weakness. It was the flawless camouflage of a devastating psychological trap. I slowly lowered my gaze, deliberately dropping my chin toward my chest. I forced my shoulders to slump, carefully fabricating the exact posture of total broken submission she desperately craved. I took a deep, trembling breath, feeding her the absolute delusion of power. I gave her exactly what she wanted to see, A hardened, disciplined officer completely shattered under the heel of a suburban housewife. Seeing my pathetic compliance, her lips stretched into a sickeningly victorious grin. She let out a loud, mocking scoff and sharply spun around. Her heels clicked loudly against the hardwood floor as she confidently marched out, basking in the false glory of her dominance. She had absolutely no idea that the very second her shadow cleared the doorway, my eyes darted back up. They were ice-cold, perfectly steady, and completely devoid of mercy. Her arrogant delusion had just handed me the final key to lock her in a permanent, inescapable legal cage. 2 in the morning. The pale blue light radiating from the screen of Chloe's MacBook Air traced the sharp, hardened angles of my face. I sat cross-legged on the cold hardwood floor of my old, cramped bedroom, entirely consumed by the shadows. My fingers glided across the keyboard with absolute terrifying silence. The high-intensity intelligence reconnaissance training I endured at Quantico had deeply embedded itself into my muscle memory. It heightened every single sense, fully transforming me from a despised, abused daughter into a methodical investigator working covertly within the walls of my own home. Through the incredibly thin drywall separating our rooms, I could hear the rhythmic, heavy snoring of my mother and sister. They were sleeping deeply, utterly unbothered by the lives they were so casually destroying. I could vividly picture the pathetic dreams drowning them right now. Dreams of liquidating the land my grandfather bled for just to trade it for glossy designer handbags and pretentious golf outings with fake high society friends. They genuinely believed I was a compliant, easily manipulated pawn, completely ignorant against dirty financial manipulation in the suburbs. A floorboard groaned sharply beneath my shifting weight. I froze, my fingers hovering a centimeter above the keys, every muscle locked. Heavy footsteps shuffled on the other side of the thin wall. A door handle twisted. I held my breath for a full 5 seconds, ears straining. The bathroom faucet ran briefly, then stopped. The footsteps shuffled back. The snoring resumed. I exhaled through my nose and returned to the screen. Their towering arrogance had bred a pathetic, amateurish carelessness. When I bypassed the password on Chloe's laptop, a ridiculously predictable combination of her own birth date, I didn't even need to deploy any complex decryption software. They hadn't bothered to hide anything. Right in the center of a cluttered desktop buried under dozens of shopping app shortcuts sat an unencrypted folder. I clicked it open. Staring back at me was an emergency conservatorship petition already neatly filled out with my full name and packed with fabricated malicious lies, just waiting for a signature. Right beside it lay the blueprint of their entire parasitic extortion plot, a power of attorney heavily featuring my forged digital signature carefully traced from old documents. A quitclaim deed prepared to force my father out of his own home. And a massive stack of bank statements proving my military pension was being illegally siphoned directly into their real estate shell companies. They were brazenly storing federal crimes right on their home screen, acting like arrogant monarchs who could effortlessly manipulate the law. The blue light reflected in my completely still, unblinking eyes. There was no sudden shock. There was no lingering heartbreak. The absolute last fragile thread of familial affection had been permanently incinerated, leaving behind nothing but a freezing, ruthless clarity. Moving with rapid, flawless precision, I photographed every file, every routing number, and every forged signature. I opened a highly secured, encrypted satellite connection, bundled the massive digital pile of guilt into a single file, and hit send. The recipient was Major Eric Vance. This devastating stack of evidence was now safely locked inside the secure servers of the JAG office. A flawless, inescapable snare had just been pulled tight. I gently closed the laptop lid. A soft click echoed in the dark. In the next room, my mother's snoring continued, completely oblivious to the fact that I was fully prepared to dismantle her entire delusional empire. The piercing wail of the ambulance siren tore through the thick night, leaving the opulent VIP lounge of the country club far behind. I lay flat on the narrow stretcher, my entire body rigid. The cold plastic of the oxygen mask bit sharply into the bridge of my nose, forcing high-pressure air into my violently spasming lungs. Every single inhalation felt like my chest was tearing apart. A powerful dose of bronchodilators pushed straight into my IV began to work, but it threw my nervous system into a harsh, trembling overdrive. Vance sat on the metal bench across from me, his jaw clenched tight. He glanced down at his phone, read something on the screen, and his eyes hardened with a cold, controlled fury I had never seen in him before. He didn't share what the message said. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. Right now, back at the lounge, my mother was undoubtedly squeezing out fake tears. She was playing the role of the tragic, suffering mother in front of Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, deliberately using my severe physical collapse to desperately farm sympathy and cement her status among the elite. The sheer hypocrisy of it made me physically nauseous. The intense rush of chemicals in my blood suddenly dragged me backward, throwing me violently into a blistering summer afternoon when I was 8 years old. The memory was so visceral I could actually smell the hot, melting asphalt. I had flipped over the handlebars of my bicycle on a steep hill near our house. My knee was shredded, blood mixing with grit and dirt, staining my stark white socks a deep red. Sobbing uncontrollably, I had limped into the house, desperate for a comforting hug, a simple bandage, or even just a kind word from my mother. When I reached the living room doorway, she was busy admiring a brand new silk dress in the large mirror. She glanced down at my mangled, bleeding knee, and her eyes immediately darted to the incredibly expensive Persian rug directly beneath my feet. Not a single trace of maternal pity crossed her contoured face. There was only raw, unfiltered disgust. She took a sharp step backward, waving her hand with a harsh, dismissive flick of her wrist, glaring at me exactly as if I were a filthy stray dog tracking a disease into her pristine home. That silent, disgusted rejection permanently shattered the emotional core of an 8-year-old child, entirely severing any concept of unconditional maternal love. I blinked hard against the harsh fluorescent lights of the ambulance, aggressively forcing that memory back down into the dark where it belonged. I refocused on the present reality. Sitting right beside me on the freezing metal bench was Major Eric Vance. The ambulance lurched violently over an uneven road, but Vance's massive frame remained entirely motionless, as immovable as a boulder. His razor-sharp eyes scanned my heart monitor with clinical precision. He didn't ask a single unnecessary question. With the razor-sharp intuition of a seasoned legal expert, he had instantly deduced my family's sickening motives the second he burst through the lounge doors. His thick, veined hand gripped the metal rail of my stretcher so tightly that his knuckles were stark white. The heavy silence radiating from him was terrifyingly protective. He didn't need to speak for me to know that his mind was already calculating every single legal loophole, preparing to completely dismantle my toxic family, using the full crushing weight of the law. My absolute strongest, most impenetrable defense was coming from a complete stranger rather than the people who shared my blood. 9 o'clock at night. The hospital room was enveloped in a tense silence, broken only by the steady, rhythmic hum of the life support monitor. The jagged lines on the screen had smoothed out, taking on a steady trajectory. My breathing was finally clear, but the air in the room was thick with a chilling anticipation. I lay perfectly still on the stiff mattress, staring blankly at the bright white ceiling. I knew exactly where my family was. Somewhere out there, speeding under the patchy streetlights of the city, my mother and sister were sitting in the back of an Uber. I could vividly picture the eager, arrogant expression stretched across their faces. They were undoubtedly clutching that fabricated psychological evaluation, and the quit-claim deed practically shaking with excitement as they raced toward the hospital to strip away my freedom. They genuinely believed that my severe medical emergency was the perfect leverage to finally label me legally incompetent. In this heavy quiet, the fragmented memory of my 8-year-old self clawed back to the surface. After my mother had waved me away with such raw disgust over the Persian rug, that little girl had limped alone into the freezing tiled bathroom. I sat huddled on the edge of the bathtub, gripping a pair of cold metal tweezers, biting my lips so hard I tasted copper just to stop from crying. I had to slowly pick pieces of sharp gravel out of my ruined knee, completely abandoned in my own home. My fingertips instinctively pressed against the jagged scar on my chest, the same scar my mother had ground her heel into just hours ago. That absolute isolation clashed violently with the image of Corporal Davis, a 19-year-old colleague I had known for barely 3 months. During a highly dangerous assignment last year, when a sudden structural collapse sent a shower of shattered metal flying toward us, Davis didn't hesitate for a single second. He threw his entire body over mine, absorbing the devastating impact to shield me. A near stranger was entirely willing to sacrifice his physical safety for me, while my own family pushed me into the dirt to protect their elite illusion. The screen of my encrypted phone resting on the cold metal bedside table suddenly flared to life. A new message popped up. It was from my mother. I reached over my fingers perfectly steady and read every single word without blinking. "You are a rabid dog for embarrassing me at the country club. I am bringing the papers and I am locking you up permanently." The sheer, unfiltered arrogance vibrating through that message was the final spark needed to incinerate whatever microscopic trace of familial mercy I had left. That text didn't instill a single ounce of fear in me. It simply confirmed that they had gleefully stepped past the point of no return, walking blindly into the exact snare I had constructed for them. The psychological game of endurance was officially over. I slowly sat up. Every trace of the weakened patient who had just narrowly escaped suffocating vanished entirely. I reached over, peeled back the surgical tape, and smoothly withdrew the IV catheter from the back of my hand, pressing a gauze pad tightly over the vein until the bleeding stopped. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and pulled my crisp uniform from my canvas duffel bag. I dressed slowly, methodically. Every button I fastened, every lace I pulled tight on my heavy boots was an act of absolute precision. When I smoothed down the final crease of my jacket, I was no longer a daughter discarded by her family. I was a completely detached, iron-willed commander standing in total silence, perfectly prepared to greet the arrogant fools currently rushing headfirst into my inescapable legal trap. Bright sunlight replaced the cold fluorescent glare slicing through the hospital window and highlighting the dust motes suspended in the sterile air. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, my chin raised slowly, adjusting the cuffs of my uniform. Every movement was precise and grounded. I wasn't just calm. I was anchored by a profound reassurance. I knew with absolute certainty that right at this very moment, miles away at that rotting house, a small team of veterans, my trusted brothers, were gently lifting my father into a secure vehicle. They were carrying out a covert rescue operation, extracting him from that toxic environment and driving him straight to the absolute safety of the VA hospital. The realization that his failing lungs were finally breathing free air hardened my resolve. From the hallway outside, the frantic clicking of heels echoed against the tile, followed immediately by a shrill, piercing voice that shattered the quiet of the ward. My mother had arrived, and she had brought Marcus Thorne with her. "Get out of the way, I am her mother." Her voice shrilled thick with a nauseatingly fake desperation. "My daughter is having a psychotic episode. She is a danger. I have an emergency psychiatric hold right here." Through the narrow slit of the door, I watched her shoving the forged psych hold toward the staff aggressively performing for the hallway, desperately trying to command the attention of hospital security to force her way inside. She genuinely believed that the forged papers Marcus had drafted were a magical key that could instantly strip away my civil rights. But her hysterical performance crashed violently against an immovable physical barrier. Head nurse Marisol stood firmly blocking the doorway. The seasoned professional who had managed countless high-stress emergencies didn't flinch or blink. She completely ignored my mother's theatrical agitation. Marisol's voice was as hard as granite, completely unaffected by the upper-class entitlement radiating from my mother. "The patient has explicitly requested no visitors," she stated, coldly crossing her arms. "Unless you have a state court order, no one is allowed to step past this line." Marcus Thorne took a hesitant step forward, pointing a manicured finger. "Under state law, a family member with a valid conservatorship has absolute authority over the patient. You open this door immediately." But before the corrupt lawyer could even finish his sentence, Major Eric Vance stepped out from the corner of the corridor. His massive frame cast a dark, imposing shadow over the two of them. Moving with terrifying calmness, Vance reached past. Marisol pulled my door shut and turned the heavy metal deadbolt. The sharp, decisive click echoed through the hallway, permanently sealing off their only point of entry and locking me in a total sanctuary. Vance took one heavy step toward Marcus, raising the heavy brass of his JAG badge. The glare of federal authority hit the sleazy lawyer instantly. Marcus physically recoiled, stepping backward and swallowing his cheap legal threats. Without uttering a single word, Vance reached out and snatched the fabricated conservatorship petition right out of my mother's trembling hand. He quickly scanned the malicious lies printed on the page. His face remained entirely stoic. He didn't tear it. He coldly folded the forged document and slid it into a clear plastic evidence bag, permanently securing her felony charge. The staggering arrogance on my mother's face completely shattered. Her mouth fell open in pure, horrifying shock as she watched her only piece of leverage get casually destroyed. She frantically looked around for help, but she found nothing but the cold, absolute authority of a man who had just trapped her in a legal corner she could never talk her way out of. The scene shifted immediately to the hospital's private lounge, a quiet, sterile room decorated with faded landscape paintings and dark leather sofas. I had specifically asked Vance to secure this room, setting the final stage for my mother's total collapse. I strode confidently into the center of the lounge, my boots echoing heavily against the tile. As I stood there, a vivid parallel picture formed in my mind. Back at that rotting house, my cowardly Uncle Arthur was undoubtedly shaking frantically, shoving clothes into a suitcase. The very second the veteran team arrived to extract my father, Arthur must have smelled the impending legal disaster and chosen to flee like a rat from a collapsing foundation. The sham of family loyalty, no matter how fake or fragile, was actively splitting open from the inside out. Vance silently herded my mother, Chloe, and Marcus into the room. They were fuming with anger, but their hands trembled with an unmistakable creeping anxiety. The fake family prestige she used to suffocate my childhood was about to become the exact legal leverage I used to permanently dismantle her. I stopped squarely in front of the heavy tempered glass coffee table. No pointless rambling, no emotional monologues. I raised my arm and slammed a thick, heavy stack of printed documents down onto the glass. The sharp smack of paper hitting the table rang out like a gavel striking wood in the silent room. "Here are the bank statements." I stated, my voice completely flat and ice cold, pointing directly at the highlighted routing numbers. "They clearly show the cash flow from my military savings being funneled straight into your shell company's account, Chloe. And here is the rental receipt for the convertible Porsche paid for with that exact money." Chloe's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. She stumbled a step backward, her eyes wide with sheer panic, her jaw visibly shaking so hard her teeth chattered, utterly unable to form a single word of defense. I didn't give them a single second to breathe or regroup. I pulled a small digital recorder from my pocket and hit play. The sleazy, arrogant voice of Marcus Thorne instantly filled the quiet lounge, clearly confirming his cut of the commission for fabricating the psychological hold and forcing my father to sign away the property deed. Marcus froze entirely, heavy beads of sweat breaking out across his forehead. Realizing his law license was about to become worthless confetti, he slowly backed away, desperately trying to slip behind the leather sofa to escape the massive legal fallout. My mother's face twisted in pure, horrified panic. She opened her mouth, desperately preparing to launch into her usual hypocritical defense, fully ready to twist reality to play the victim. But before a single lie could leave her lips, the most perfect, devastating sound echoed through the hallway. The crisp, clear ding of the elevator arriving. The stainless steel doors slid smoothly open. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, the president of the Women's Club and the exact high society idol my mother worshipped, stepped out. Vance had flawlessly orchestrated her arrival under the pretense of a routine VIP medical checkup. Eleanor walked forward, her sharp, judgmental eyes instantly landing on the damning bank statements scattered across the glass table. She heard the final filthy seconds of the recorded confession. Eleanor looked at my mother with a level of disgust reserved for the absolute lowest form of trash, a cheap con artist stealing from a dying husband to fund a fake, hollow lifestyle. My mother stood completely paralyzed, her expensive makeup unable to hide the profound, crushing humiliation. Her entire fake elite empire crumbled instantly on the spot, destroyed, without me ever having to raise my voice. Watching her fake empire crumble is exactly why you must set firm boundaries with toxic people. Take a quick moment to like this video and comment the word karma if you believe the truth always finds a way to expose the liars. I stood tall in the center of the room, taking in the trembling patheticness of the people who were just moments ago trying to lock me away. The suffocating tension in the VIP lounge now belonged entirely to my control. I looked directly into my mother's wide, panic-clouded eyes and delivered the final, devastating legal consequence she never saw coming. The frail man you intended to hold as a financial prisoner for extortion is now safe. I declared, my voice ringing with total authority. My veteran team has taken him to the VA hospital. The sentence hit her like a heavy physical weight. Her only remaining extortion leverage, the final twisted card she held to force my compliance, had been permanently smashed. Knowing my father was finally breathing safe air injected a surge of energy into my veins, washing away all my physical exhaustion. The moment my mother's facade of power cracked, the cowardly survival instincts of the parasites instantly took over. Any illusion of family loyalty, no matter how fake or fragile, turned to dust right before my eyes. Through the clear glass walls of the lounge, Chloe spotted two uniformed patrol officers casually walking down the corridor. Pure, unadulterated cowardice instantly choked her throat. Abandoning every shred of respect, Chloe scrambled backward, distancing herself from our mother as if she were a contagious disease. She shrieked wildly, waving her expensive manicured fingers, pointing directly at the woman who raised her. "It's her. She forced me to do it. I have nothing to do with those companies. She forged the signatures. She's the one committing mail fraud. Arrest her." The severe federal charge of mail fraud, screamed by her favorite golden child, permanently shattered my mother's ego. They immediately turned on each other, screaming and assigning blame like starving rats, trampling one another on a sinking ship. In the corner of the room, Marcus Thorne had already slinked backward into the shadows and completely vanished, abandoning the very partners he had just promised millions. Realizing she was completely isolated, betrayed by her favorite daughter, and stripped of her mask in front of the local elite, my mother resorted to the cheapest, most pathetic manipulation tactic she knew. She suddenly clutched her chest with both hands, gasping dramatically. She rolled her eyes back toward the ceiling and swayed on her feet before collapsing heavily onto the carpet. She groaned loudly, faking a severe heart attack, clinging to the desperate hope that a sudden medical emergency would pause the massive legal disaster rapidly closing in on her. But she had severely miscalculated. I crossed my arms and stood perfectly still, looking down at her twisting, fake agony with freezing indifference. Head nurse Marisol, a professional who had actually saved people from genuine cardiac arrest, simply leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, offering a completely unimpressed stare. Not a single medical machine was called for. Not a single shout for help echoed in the room. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling adjusted her silk scarf and glanced down at my mother's theatrical display on the carpet. She shook her head slowly, her voice quiet and laced with a disgust that cut deeper than any scream. 30 years in this community, and this is the most disgraceful display I have ever witnessed. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the elevator. She didn't spare my mother a single second of pity. Lying flat on the carpet, my mother slowly opened one eye to peek at her audience. The horrifying realization finally hit her. Her pathetic performance had earned her nothing but a freezing, uninterrupted silence. Everything she had built was completely ruined, and there was no way out. 15 minutes after the chaotic performance at the VIP lounge ended, I finalized my discharge paperwork, officially cementing my legal autonomy on record. The fabricated psychiatric hold was now nothing more than garbage. I walked down the quiet, empty corridor and pushed open the heavy glass doors leading straight into the dim underground parking garage. The yellow flickering light cast long shadows over the concrete. And my prediction once again was completely accurate. My mother Sarah was desperately pacing right next to my Jeep. She looked entirely pathetic and ruined. The incredibly expensive mascara she had carefully applied earlier was now melting, leaving harsh, dark streaks running down her cheeks. The second she saw me approach, She lunged forward, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her elegant high society persona. She dropped heavily to her knees on the rough oil-stained asphalt. Her expensive nylon tights tore instantly against the gritty surface. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her tears entirely driven by raw panic. "Shayla, I'm sorry. Please tell them to stop. The bank just called. They've frozen all the joint accounts. My American Express is locked. You can't treat your own mother like this." She wailed loudly. Federal investigators at the CID had just executed the warrants, based on my encrypted intel, instantly freezing every single fraudulent shell company and joint account she used to siphon my money. The cash flow that funded her entire illusion had been abruptly strangled. She crawled toward me, grabbing the tough fabric of my pants with dirt-stained fingers. "Please, I can't live without money. Save me," she begged. She didn't shed a single tear of remorse for the immense psychological damage she caused. She wasn't crying for the husband struggling with heart failure. She was only screaming because her plastic credit card was now completely worthless. I didn't take a single step backward, nor did I raise my voice in anger. I simply stared down at the messy, ruined woman groveling on the dirty concrete. My voice was entirely flat, devoid of any warmth or lingering sorrow. "When you drove your stiletto heel into my open wound, you personally destroyed the very last trace of maternal love left in me." Moving with a swift, decisive motion, I wrenched her filthy hands away from my heavy boots. The force of her own desperate grip releasing sent her sprawling onto the slick, oily pavement. I didn't spare her a single backward glance. I climbed into my Jeep, slammed the heavy door shut, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, tearing through the suffocating air of the garage as I sped away. I left her shrinking in the rearview mirror, completely collapsed in the mess she created, waiting desperately for the legal system to dismantle her. 2 months later. The crisp morning air at Camp Pendleton carried the sharp, familiar scent of the ocean. I sat at my organized desk holding a warm cup of black coffee. My encrypted personal phone suddenly vibrated on the table. The screen lit up with a message from an unsaved civilian number. "Mom misses you." I stared at those 3 pathetic words for exactly 2 seconds. It was a desperate, hollow plea from a woman currently facing severe federal penalties for financial fraud. Not a single trace of hesitation flickered in my chest. With one swift, decisive tap, I hit delete, then immediately forwarded the number to cybersecurity to block it permanently. I took a slow sip of the bitter hot coffee, the intense flavor grounding me in the present. For the first time in 26 years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I had finally built an absolute, unshakable peace. Sometimes the hardest boundary to draw is with the people who share your blood, but holding on to a toxic family will only pull you under. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you in the first place. True family is defined by loyalty and respect, not by genetics or forced obligation. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to save yourself? What was the final straw that made you say, "Enough is enough"? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Please like this video if you agree. I'm Bronte J. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.